Good afternoon, committee. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to those in the audience. This is the Ag Committee, and we meet usually Tuesday through Thursday, so you're welcome. It's just like church. You're welcome anytime you want to come. So before we get started, we do have a busy day, but I do want to take just a few moments to talk about what this week is. This week is National Agriculture Week. Yesterday was National Agriculture Day, the first full day of spring. It is every year. Yes, I know Ken does this about every year. I'm not going to pontificate very long because we all need to get out of here, but Kansas is the leader when it comes to sorghum production, as well as winter wheat production, and one of the top beef producing states in the nation, and ever so slowly becoming more important in the dairy industry. And we could go through basically all of them. So what our farmers and ranchers do is a tremendous benefit. And folks may say, well, I don't have anything to do with agriculture. Well, if you go to the grocery store, if you grow a garden, you're part of agriculture. And so just want to take our opportunity, since we didn't do it on the floor this morning, to celebrate agriculture. And I think it's good that this committee do that and celebrate. You have what I will call the whole month of March to do it. So, no, just this week or yesterday or so on. So with that, we do have two hearings today. And so we will start with hearing on Senate Bill 120, calling Kyle Hamilton to give an explanation of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So Senate Bill 120 is actually a Senate mirror of House Bill 2047, which this committee heard back in February 13th. And the committee passed out that House bill after making an amendment to it. And the amendment was just to add a section that would make it identical to this bill, Senate Bill 120. And then that House Bill 2047 passed the House Chamber 120-2, and it's currently sitting in Senate Agriculture. But jumping to the current Senate Bill 120, Section 1 would amend KSA 65-163 to allow the Secretary of Health and Environment to adopt rules and regulations for an annual certification program for the replacement of segments of water distribution systems. In this Section 1, that's what was added by this committee in the House version of the bill back in February. And then moving to Section 2, currently KSA 65-3226 authorizes a maximum of a 20-year repayment period for loans from the Kansas Water Pollution Control Revolving Loan Fund. Section 2 would allow any agreements for loans from the fund entered into after July 1, 2023 to be repaid within 30 years after such date. Instead of just the 20. Senate Bill 120 would become effective upon publication in the statute book. I'd be happy to take any preliminary questions.
Any questions for Kyle? Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, Kyle. I was trying to get it up on my screen. What did they do in the Senate? Has the Senate seen this bill?
Yes,
This is Senate bill, but we put our contents in it, right?
No, at the beginning of the session, there were basically two versions of this bill, a Senate version, which that's what we're hearing today, and then the House version, which this committee heard back in February. And what this committee did when it heard the House mirror is it added a section to make it identical to this current Senate Bill 120.
That's where I got lost, right there.
Right, and then the House Chamber passed that House bill out.
It's the bill we passed.
Right, okay. And now that is sitting over in the Senate Ag Committee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Kyle, up first, for oral proponents, William Carr, Assistant Director for the Bureau of Water for KDHE. Mr. Carr, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee. My name is William Carr. I'm the Assistant Director for the Bureau of Water at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. The Bureau of Water oversees both the public water supply permitting program and the Kansas Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund, which this bill impacts. As I mentioned, this same exact language in House Bill 2047. KDHE support has not changed. We still support this bill. The annual certification, the changes to the annual certification program to include distribution segments will further reduce the number of projects that KDHE has to review for permit applications, thus freeing up time and allowing us to spend more time and get to other projects that aren't covered through this certification program to get to review those projects. Likewise, on the Kansas Water Pollution Control Revolving Loan Fund, extending this, the repayment period from 20 to 30 years gives the municipalities flexibility to allow to charge lower rates, user rates, to collect money annually to make debt service payments on the loans. That's really all I have prepared. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions, Mr. Carr? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, Josh Swati, on behalf of Kansas Municipal Utilities. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Joshua Swati here on behalf of the Kansas Municipal Utilities. Same thing, we don't necessarily care how it gets done. We just have to get this bill across the finish line. As you'll recall, on behalf of the city of Dodge City, and in fact, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, with it being Ag Week, they're making a significant investment in their water system because of the new Hillmar cheese plant in Dodge City, and they needed an extension of the amortization period. So this bill achieves that. They kind of need it to be done this session, so we had two bills going on either side. And we need one of those to get across the finish line. Easiest thing, in my opinion, would be have it end up on the consent calendar, but I leave that up to the wisdom of this body. So, thank you.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, you mentioned it being on the consent calendar, but I looked at it and there are 3 senators that voted against it. Do you know why those senators voted against the bill?
I couldn't answer that. It's a good question. Yeah.
Very good. Other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next up, Doug Mays, representing Kansas Rural Water Association. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Doug Mays. I live here in Topeka, and I have been associated in one way or another with the Kansas Rural Water Association for about 40 years, with friendship, coffee, lots of coffee, and finally, after I got out of the legislature and I helped them there as much as I could, they asked me if I'd come on. I am a paid lobbyist for them. It pays for the gasoline to get to the Capitol and back, and I would just assume they didn't pay me anything because then I wouldn't have to worry about taxes. The Kansas Rural Water Association has a membership of 265 rural water districts in Kansas and 475 municipalities. That's over half of all the municipalities in the state. The mission of the KRWA is to provide education, technical assistance, and leadership to public water and wastewater utilities in order to enhance the public health and sustain Kansas communities. For many years, there have been a lot of frustrations that have been expressed, and I've heard them firsthand, expressed by systems and engineers alike over the long delays in getting simple projects approved by the KDHE. KDHE has been far, far behind and slow with approval. Weeks is not unusual, and there have been cases of months, and at least one that we know of was over a year. The response, no doubt, that we do not doubt, is that they don't have enough engineers, and maybe they don't pay enough. They don't say that, but we believe that to be true, but it doesn't change what has happened and what continues to happen. This bill, 120, as amended, as I said, it allows the Secretary of Health and Environment to adopt rules and regulations authorizing public water systems with, and it's in quotes, qualified staff. And I don't think that's a term of art. We don't know what it means, but I think it means they have their own professional engineers there that do that. I hope that's what it is. That is not a problem with us. The they said if you have a water system that has qualified staff to approve the extension of distribution systems or the replacement of segments of distribution systems, this bill would let them not have to send things in for approval. The PEs that they have on staff in these systems would be able to do it themselves. Real quick, I want to just, how many people here, do we have any engineers here, PEs? Not one. If you've lived with a PE like I did with my father, you have a particular understanding. My father was a PE. PE stands for Professional Engineer. It is a designation that is earned, and it is not easy to become a PE. Once you are a PE, it's like MD, JD, and so on. It means something. The water system qualified staff, if they're PEs, that's great. But the thing is, there are very few systems that have their own on-site staff that's part of their organization. I think all the large cities or even medium-sized cities have that. But the truth is that we have all these other systems around the state that they can't afford anyone on staff, and they don't make that many changes. So they have to reach out to businesses like we have some here in town. Kirk Fountain, Storwell, Bartlett and West, and Kansas City has some massive ones there. And then anywhere you go in the state, there are PEs. And most of them can do what needs to be done with these things. When you are, you have what's the right word? I'm trying to get this right here. When you have an expansion, or you're redoing segments of a system, and I think they say segments because it'd be a whole different thing if it was the whole system. They have to bring somebody in. Now, some of these people that are working on the qualified staff, they moonlight, and that fills in the need there. But they have to get someone to design the system and certify it in order to send it to KDHE. The point that we can't understand is there's not a whole lot to these things that they are wanting sent in for continued approval by KDHE. It doesn't take much to design a new water line in a system. The most exciting thing in that would be a fire hydrant or possibly a turn off of the system. What we are asking here is that the language in number 3, I think, would be changed. And I have, I'll just read this to you. This is what's suggested by the KRWA's lawyer who now lives in New Mexico. I'll read this to you and see if it does make sense to you. And most of this comes from the bill today. Public water supply systems that employ professional engineers on staff or by contract shall not be required to secure an additional permit for the extension of distribution systems or the replacement of segments of distribution systems if the plan for such extension or replacement are prepared by a professional engineer as defined by KSA 7403. Now, just in case you wonder what it takes to be a professional engineer, it's not easy. You have to graduate from a college or university with a background. It has to be engineering that you graduate with. Fine arts degrees don't get you there. Then you have to take satisfactory passage of an examination of fundamentals. And then you have to have proof of 4 years of engineering experience, usually with another, someone along the line of the ones that I mentioned earlier. And then you have to take satisfactory passage of an examination in the professional practice utilized by the board. Now, all of this is required by the State Board of Technical Professions. It's about a 6-year minimum time to get it done. And that's why I say it's a lot like the other things, like not JD, et cetera. We believe that this is just common sense, that there is no reason to require a system that has a PE that will design the program, certify it, why they have to still send it to the KDHE so they could approve it somewhere down the line. It makes no difference whether the PE is under contract with the system or whether the PE is on staff with another system which is bigger and can afford it. There is no difference. This would speed things up and would make everybody involved in rural water and the other systems in the state very happy. I'd be happy to answer any questions. By the way, I have a cold and I'm just filled with drugs right now.
We've had that discussion in this committee so far, Mr. Mays, this year, right? Okay. Any questions for Mr. Mays? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else here to testify as a proponent? Seeing none, we do also, committee, have proponent testimony from Nick Hernandez, the city manager of Dodge, Wendy Stark from the League of Kansas Municipalities, and Ellen Parker, associate attorney with Water One. I show no opponents or neutral testimony. Is there anyone here to testify as a opponent or neutral on Senate Bill 120? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 120. Now, before we go on to the next one, I want to remind the committee we do have the questions answered from the Department of Agriculture on the follow-up of our meeting on the 14th with hemp. The questions we did not get answered, so they have offered those to us. Terry sent them out about the same time she sent out our testimony here today for our next hearing. So I think that was after the testimony was sent out. The hearing on, before we get started on the next hearing, I want to set some ground rules. We know there's a lot of folks here to testify. There's a lot of folks who are interested in what is going on. Due for a matter of time, other than the secretary, people will give them 5 minutes. What we will do is then at the end of the cluster of proponents, oral, we will open it back up. We'll open the questions to the members, and everybody will be available to answer those questions. We also have some online folks, and then they will also have the opportunity to take questions at that time. Same thing with the proponents or neutral, if those are there to be here either in person or online. I'm fair but firm. If things get out of hand, I'll stop the hearing. It'll be done. I don't think either side wants that to happen because we're in year one of a 2-year cycle. So it's understood, we'll move forward. We'll open up the hearing on House Bill 2433. Kyle, once again, would you explain the bill? If you can make it last 5 minutes, yes.
We're starting the timer.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My brief today will be a bit longer than some of my normal briefs, and I know that's exactly what you want to hear after, what was it, 3 hours of House debate today. But you will see that one of the attachments that Terry sent out is a small overview of the Pet Animal Act itself. And then there was a second document, that's my brief for this specific bill. I'm not going to read through the whole overview document, but I'm going to start out just going over the first couple paragraphs to help explain what is the Pet Animal Act, and then I'll jump over to the bill. So KSA 47-1726 states that the Kansas Pet Animal Act shall license, permit, and regulate the conditions of certain premises and facilities within the state of Kansas where animals are maintained, sold, or offered, or maintained for sale. And animals is specifically defined within the act. It means any live dog, cat, rabbit, rodent, non-human primate, bird, or other warm-blooded vertebrate, or any fish, snake, or other cold-blooded vertebrate. And then it states the animal does not include horses, cattle, sheep, goats, swine, ratites, domesticated deer, or domestic fowl. The Kansas Pet Animal Act requires licenses for animal distributors, pet shop operators, pound or animal shelters, hobby breeders, research facilities, boarding or training kennels, animal breeders, retail breeders, and rescue networks. And in the memo, overview memo, I include the definitions for each of those terms. Permits are required for out-of-state distributors of dogs or cats, and licenses and permits are provided by the Animal Health Commissioner and expire on September 30th of each year. The Animal Health Commissioner may refuse to issue or renew or could suspend or revoke a license or permit for any of the reasons listed in statute, including when the feeding, watering, sanitizing, and housing practices at the licensees or permittees' premises are not consistent with the Kansas Pet Animal Act. Also, for failure to provide adequate veterinary medical care to the animals that are in the licensee or permittee's custody or care. So jumping over to the bill, we'll start Section 1 would amend the definitions section of the Kansas Pet Animal Act. The definition of adequate watering would be amended to require, when species appropriate, a continuously accessible water supply unless the attending veterinarian has approved otherwise for a medical reason. The definitions of animal distributor premises, you can see that starting on page 3 of the bill, line 30. And out-of-state distributor would be amended to include the selling of cats and dogs for resale instead of just the purchase of cats and dogs. And then below that, animal distributor premises would additionally be amended to exclude licensed pet shops unless such premises also sells animals at wholesale. And then out-of-state distributor premises would be amended to include motor vehicles or a portion thereof used for such distributor's business within the definition of adequate veterinary medical care on page 4, line 21. Current language stating that the term shall not apply to United States Department of Agriculture licensed animal breeders or animal distributors would be stricken. Section 2 starts on page 4, line 37. It would clarify that no person shall operate an animal shelter without a license from the Animal Health Commissioner, except for a licensed veterinarian who operates such shelter from their veterinary premises. Section 3 amends the statute that allows the commissioner to refuse to issue or renew or suspend or revoke a license or permit. New language would be inserted on page 5, line 29, stating that nothing in the act shall be construed as preventing any licensee from operating in such licensee's private home or residence if such home or residence complies with the requirements of the act. Additionally, new subsections would be inserted on page 6, line 36, to authorize the commissioner to enter into contracts or agreements with licensed animal shelters and rescue networks for the purpose of seizing, transporting, housing, and providing care for seized pet animals. Such shelters or rescue networks could then seek recovery of their costs from the person from whom the pet animals were seized. Such person would be required to pay such costs before the animal could be returned to such person. And you can see that on page 7, line 4. If a bill is not paid within 10 days by such person, the animal would be deemed to be abandoned and adopted by the shelter or rescue network if approved by a veterinarian. And that's still on page 7 down in line 18. Section 4 of the bill would be amended just to add references to Section 3's new seizure and impoundment provisions. Section 5 would amend the Act's inspection requirements, starting on page 8, line 37, to allow licensees to designate at least one representative to be present at the licensed premises during an inspection. Additionally, the section would be amended on page 9, line 19, to add requirements for licensees who cease their licensed activities, including 30-day notice to the commissioner and a closing inspection. Under current law, the commissioner is required to have training procedures for inspectors. Such requirement would be amended on page 10, line 26, to cover a specific additional pet animal care practices. Section 6 would require, on page 11, line 26, rules and regulations to cover exercise and socialization, disease prevention, biosecurity, and closing inspections. A current requirement that the commissioner only apply federal rules and regulations to USDA licensees would be stricken on line 38. Section 7 on page 12, line 14, would amend the Act's penalties statute to reference Section 3's new seizure and impoundment provisions. Section 8 on page 13, line 1, would amend the fees section of the Act. Except as otherwise listed in subsection A, fees would be raised from $450 to $600. A new fee would be added on page 14, line 19, for unlicensed persons engaging in activities that require a license. This new unlicensed facility fee would be in the amount of up to $150 per day and $500 per day for any subsequent violation of the Act beginning from the date of noncompliance. Such fee would be in addition to any other fines or fees assessed under the Act. Additionally, the commissioner would be required, you can see that down on line 43, to prepare an annual report on the finances of the Animal Facilities Inspection Program and to submit such report to the Secretary of Agriculture, the Pet Animal Advisory Board, and the Agriculture Committees. Section 9 would clarify, and that's on page 15, line 18, that no person shall operate a boarding or training kennel without a license, except for a licensed veterinarian who operates such kennel from their veterinary premises. And then Section 10 would state on page 15, line 34, that a licensee or permit holder who is in the process of ceasing business on September 30th may be issued a temporary closing permit. Current law lists the date as July 1. House Bill 2437 would become effective upon publication in the statute book. I'm happy to take any preliminary questions. As you can tell, this is not a bill you can just completely summarize in one sentence. It's lots of in and outs on different sections. So I'm confident that the following conferees will have a lot more details about the whys and wherefores. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? Representative Blex.
Thank you, Kyle. On page 1 on line 17 and 18, I was glad to see that continuous water supply. What can you define that? Is that an automatic water, or is that just keeping the dish full? Because I start to get quite a few complaints from fish on that 12-hour interval. Thank you.
Other questions? Representative Roth.
Thank you, Kyle, and thank you, Chairman. Is there, if someone gets a license denied, is there anything in this that gives them any kind of recourse to help them through the process if their kennel is decertified or something like that, and their license revoked, but they don't believe that they are, they believe they're doing the best? Is there any kind of recourse for them?
I would need to just double check the provisions. I'm not sure if this is an act that uses the Administrative Procedure Act, but I believe there would be some kind of a hearing process where a licensee permittee could try and make a case for the Secretary's order, but I'm not sure on the specifics off the top of my head.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Other questions? All right, Kyle, thank you so much. All right, and we'll start with our proponents and oral, and that would include the Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Beam. Mr. Secretary, thanks, and welcome back to committee.
Well, thank you. Am I on? Okay. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for scheduling the hearing. I am Mike Beam, the Secretary of Agriculture. With me today is Deputy Secretary Kelsey Olson, who you've probably seen before this committee several times. Also, I'd like to mention that our Animal Facility Inspection Program Director, Dr. Sasha Thomason, is with us today, and then, of course, our attorney that works in this area, Nicole Costanzo. And so they're the brains. They help me respond to questions that I can't really ask, but I appreciate them being here and appreciate their devotion and passion about this program. I know Kyle went through a lot of changes to the bill, but I would just say really the primary purpose is to update and clarify these existing statutes that have been in place, many of which for 30 years. The Pet Animal Act is administered by the Animal Facility Inspection Program, which is within the Animal Health Division of Kansas Department of Agriculture. So the most of this bill was first enacted in 1988. And in my prior career, I spent considerable time, and I, in fact, was here at the time that it was initially passed. And I can remember that originally the affected parties, the licensees, were very upset and very resistant. But in the end, or shortly thereafter, they end up being very supportive of a program to try to address a very negative perception that Kansas had with those who breed and raise dogs. And they wanted a program that had some credibility and one that would assure that their customers met these standards. And since that time, there's been a lot of different changes or proposes. And as you noted at the beginning, Mr. Chairman, there can be a lot of passion about this issue. After watching this for about 30 years, I can tell you that I'm pretty sure most Kansans have personal experience, considerable knowledge, and strong opinions about dogs and cats. So I'm hoping, as you mentioned, that we try to focus on the provisions of the bill and go forward. I think it's also important to note, since this bill passed in the last 30 years, things are different. And I was surprised to learn that the American Veterinary Medical Association conducted a survey, apparently annual surveys, but they reported that 70% of households now own a pet. And the U.S. pet industry expenditures have increased from $90 billion in 2018 to $109 billion, or 50 billion in 2021. So I think it's also important to note how this has impacted the Kansas economy. You mentioned at the beginning, Mr. Chairman, the largest sectors. We have benefited from the growth of pet food manufacturers, which uses a considerable amount of meat products and grain. The pet food industry is now the 5th largest sector. What we consider of the 73 sectors having an ag tie, it's the 5th largest. about $3.7 billion in output, and responsible for nearly 3,000 jobs in Kansas. Simultaneous to this growth in the pet interest, pet industry, pet products, we have also learned a great deal. Those staff came before me and during the past 30 years. So we believe that we've identified over the years, and maybe more importantly recently, some changes that we think will improve the Act, help us in the administration of the program. So in addition to all the documentation that Kyle provided on the changes of the bill, attached to my testimony is general categories of the changes, and I've lumped them into two categories. One, those I believe are most affect the breeders or the licensees or the shelters. Then there's another category in regards to more changes with the agency and the program. So a lot of this is changes for us in our operating procedure. So number one, we want to make sure that we have more teeth and more ability to get those who need to have a license but refuse not to. That's addressed in the bill. We think it's important that if a facility closes, that they let us know that. And then it also has a change in our record-keeping policy. Right now, the statute's very confusing, or makes it very difficult for us to purge some old records. And so this one just simply says after 5 years, we can get rid of those records. As been mentioned at the very beginning, the bill amends what adequate watering is and makes a change to that. And it's important to note that there is a recognition that some species of animals that doesn't apply to, and there's also a veterinary option to make slightly different recommendations if necessary. We've asked for the elimination of provisions that makes different types of licenses in regards to USDA. We think this will be more USDA licenses, which that program has changed considerably, particularly on the veterinary requirements. There's another thing that specifically gives us authorization to work with shelters. We experienced a recent seizure in 2022, and we'd have conversations with the shelters previous, knowing that if we had to seize a large number of animals, we would have to have some help, and they were quite willing, but we wanted to make sure that they were appropriately compensated because it's very expensive. Last year, the legislature approved a fund for that purpose. We used most of that, but fortunately, the shelter we were able to reimburse those. But we think it ought to be clarified that the shelter does have a role, of course, under the direction or within agreement of the Animal Health Commissioner. We also think it's important that, I mentioned the closure of a facility. We actually asked for in statute that make sure that we are required to go back within 60 days after we've been notified to have that inspection. So those are kind of the highlights of the provisions, but I think it's important to note, as Kyle mentioned, it's also in my mind representing all of agriculture too, that it's important to note what's not in the bill. And this is the Kansas Pet Animal Act. The definitions very specifically say who it applies to. It also very expressly says who it doesn't apply to. I just want to suggest that all the changes or amendments provided in this bill address a specific gap or a need within the agency and with the industry, and we're very supportive of the bill. We think these updates will build on the success from last year, which the legislature enhanced this program and allow us to move another step in ability to properly manage the program. We believe the updates in the Kansas Pet Animal Act with this bill will further support the growing industry and give us guidance to ensure that pets bred, sold, rescued, adopted, or cared for in Kansas meet the highest standards of health, welfare, and safety. And so when it's appropriate, Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to respond to any questions, and of course, with the help of some of my staff as well.
All right, questions for the Secretary? Representative Featherston?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had an interim about dog breeding, not this summer, the previous summer. Do any of these recommendations come out of that?
I'm trying to recall the specifics, but I'm sure some of these issues were discussed. I'm not even sure there was a recommendation by the interim committee. It was more of an information hearing.
Right. And so who was at the table when these recommendations were determined?
In this bill, a lot of it was internal with us, our folks who've tried to administer the program. We've had some discussions with members of the Pet Advisory Committee, and we've had some discussions with animal care advocates.
Other questions for the Secretary? Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some hypothetical issues. I represent a lot of small towns, and these, they may offer for sale 1 or 2 dogs a year. Some of them by intent, others by a neighbor, traveling stranger. Would they be required to have a license? I see in there a hobby breeder is 30, less than 30 animals. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think 3 litters is a cutoff. 3 litters or less are not required.
So anything,
or number of dogs. There's a number of dogs too.
30, or if they do less than 30, they're not required any kind of a license, correct?
Have less than 30 dogs?
Right. I'm kind of confused on that because it says 3, 4, or 5 litters of dogs.
Well, it depends on whether you're looking at a breeder or a premises or a shelter. But I know somebody that just has, a few dogs and sells less than 3 litters a year are not covered by this act.
They're not required because we're kind of defining premises too as possibly a home in there, I noticed. And then I guess another, Mr. Chair, may have a couple follow-ups here. Would if a license holder that has a premise the license is revoked and you have the cost of seizures and transportation and housing of that, and I guess this is new in here, but do you anticipate that person that owns those animals that is denied a license and has them seized, would they be legally and financially liable for cost? And I'm thinking if you guys come in or somebody comes in and takes the animals, then they're obviously offered for sale. You seize them, and assuming the cost is $1,000 and you get $500 out of the animals, would that owner, breeder, be responsible for that remaining $5, or is that the state?
Oh, yeah, they would be
losses and not try to collect that.
Yeah, we would try to collect that, but I want to clarify though. The time that we would seize is if we see animals that are definitely having health and welfare challenges. If it's other issues or it's not appropriately managed, or we'll give them the chance to quickly get it taken care of. But as long as it's not the health and safety of the animal, so it's you don't fail inspection and automatically get your animal seized.
And another issue, assuming they close the business, and I know cows aren't covered, but if I sell all my cows, it's none of your business. I guess my question to be is, why is a closing inspection necessary when you've sold all your animals and you're getting out of business? I understand the notification, but you're looking at a closing inspection and a possible temporary license if for some reason they don't close. And I guess I'm trying to figure out what logic.
So I think historically there's been some instances where the licensee said, I'm closing. I'll be out of dogs in 30 days, 60 days. And we find out 3 or 4 months later that didn't happen. So we're just going to make a practice of, once you've told us that you're done, we'll go back to double assure that you don't have animals.
So you're going to have a closing inspection, and is there going to be a fee for that?
No.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Representative Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary Beam, for being here today. In the bill, it talks about opportunities for exercise and socialization experiences for the animals. Why is that an important addition?
If you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I might ask Dr. Thomason to respond to that.
Okay.
Sasha, do you mind?
I'm Sasha Thomason. I'm a veterinarian and the AFI program director. And the reason socialization is important, basically the term just as it relates to pets just refers to the exposure of puppies and kittens at a very early age of all the environmental things they could come into contact with as they age to make them more comfortable with it and kind of accepting of it. Things such as like meeting new people, meeting other, interacting and meeting other animals, same species, different species. Some dogs have problems with, things with tires or wheels or loud noises and whatnot. And so it's well known now that the prime socialization period for puppies and kittens starts at 2 to 3 weeks of age, so right after birth. And that window starts to close around 14 weeks of age for puppies, and actually a little bit earlier than that for kittens. And so if you miss that window and start later exposing them to all that, they're much more likely to develop like unwanted and bad behaviors instead. And so that tends to manifest itself in like the bad behaviors as far as, that's when you get aggression and you get fearfulness and you get like destructive behavior and just anxiety that makes it a lot less joyful to own that pet. And that has led to it's a problem because it's one of the more common reasons people decide to relinquish pet ownership or come to the vet and discuss humane euthanasia. So they can't deal with it anymore. And so to try and minimize that, if you start early, they're much more likely to just be good with that experience and accept it. It's part of their norm and they go on. And if you don't, then you have an unwanted pet situation. And if you try to, you can train it out of them, but it usually takes a professional and you're talking years. And so not everybody wants to deal with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess mine's kind of a legal question here. I see some, let's say, page 11 near the bottom of page 11. The USDA is mentioned quite often during this document, it seems like. So what's the result of these changes and why are they proposed in this bill?
Yeah, it can be a little confusing. I'm going to ask for help again on that if you don't mind. Nicole, if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Nicole Costanzo. I'm the staff attorney for the Kansas Department of Agriculture and specifically work for the Animal Facilities Inspection Program under the Division of Animal Health. My understanding of your question is asking why the provisions striking the United States Department of Agriculture licensed animal distributors and breeders was necessary. So there are actually two subject provisions that being proposed to be strict in this bill, which is the 47-1701 DD2 and then KSA 47-1712B. 1712 requires the commissioner to only adopt rules and regulations that are set forth in regulations adopted by the USDA secretary. That creates a lot of confusion for licensees and creates administrative burdens for the inspectors to have to be trained and have to apply 2 different sets of regulations. And then the second one, 1701 DD2, that one is the most concerning for KDA because currently it exempts a animal breeder distributor licensed by USDA from providing adequate veterinary care for animals. And so that's a critical issue because it prohibits the KDA inspectors from citing a violation for, say, if a licensee fails to provide veterinary care to one of the animals for, say, a infected wound. They not only cannot cite it, but they cannot require that the licensee goes and gets treatment for that animal by a veterinarian. Or seize it and take it to a veterinarian for treatment. So, if that answers your question.
I guess that was a lot of legal talk, but partly we're trying to simplify this and protect the animals. Is that the short answer?
Essentially, yes. Reduce confusion and streamline enforcement.
Thank you. I understand that one. Thank you very much.
Wanted to be more detailed.
Other questions? Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary and your staff for being here today. This certainly is a bill that's very important to me because I've worked in this industry for a long time. And I wanted to just get some clarification here and a couple of comments. You know, right on the first page, if we enacted this bill into law, it would write into statute that adequate watering means continuous supply of fresh potable water. And I would just like to comment on that a bit. You know, in the non-domesticated state, dogs don't have continuous water in front of them all the time. In fact, many situations they might only go to water several times a week. And so I think that, you know, that putting that in statute with, you know, creates some problems in my mind. I ran a boarding facility for decades. If you run I had a mixed veterinary practice or a general practice in Garnett for many years, and one of the services we offered was boarding of dogs for area residents, and we did a lot of them. We purposefully did not leave water in front of most of these animals continuously, because when they are in a confined situation like that, many of them just made a horrible mess out of things, and it was less comfortable for the animal and not helpful in any way. And so we would water several times a day as needed for the well-being of the animals, and we did not keep constant water in front of them. And that wasn't always decided by me, the veterinarian. I had staff that made those calls and provided that care for them. And so as I read this bill, you know, the only provision for not doing this would be on the order of a licensed veterinarian. And so if we move forward with this on to page 6, and it talks about the procedures for seizing animals, it appears to me that the responsibility that falls upon the commissioner, and I assume with that the commissioner's staff as well. And I think as long as we have people we know and trust, and I think that would work out fine. But I think just as this statute about water is getting written into statute, I think we live in the United States of America where you are innocent until proven guilty. And if you have someone whose opinion is you're not doing this right, it appears to me that your animals can be seized. You can pay for your own prosecution and your own defense. And I am not at all in favor of that. And I could be corrected, but that's the way I read this law that we're being asked to consider. I think there are a few other things. You know, it says if you go down to section on page 7, section 4, it says very clearly, if we read down through that, that a person has violated or failed to comply with any provision of the Kansas Pet Animal Act, any, or any rule or regulation adopted thereunder, may be imposed on such a person a civil penalty not to exceed $1,000 for each violation, or require such person to attend educational courses and so forth. And so I am very uncomfortable with this situation where people are considered guilty until proven innocent and have to pay for their own defense and prosecution and for the care of their animals. And it says for any reason. And you know, if we apply that to other species, I've been in the horse business a long time. I've always had horses, and I've traded a lot of horses. I don't have to ask anybody before I sell a horse or buy a horse. And you know, it talks about any falsification here. You know, when you trade horses, there's always just a little bit of shading of the truth. And, you know, we wouldn't have any horse traders anywhere but in jail if they had to follow the same rules that we have in this statute. And so those are some just some comments I have. I guess my question is, Mr. Secretary, am I just grossly misreading this, or is that the way that this potentially could play out for people who own pet animals?
Well, some of that you referred to as current law, and including section 4 and the fine. And I'd be glad to share with you our history of fines. So, I mean, I think I'm confident that nobody would say we've been overzealous in the fining over these. And so I'd like, have that chance to share that with you. I respect your career and knowledge as a veterinarian. And I know the watering provision is one that it's my understanding most individuals that are really kind of in the business and have a license, I haven't heard any complaints about the watering. In fact, I think most of them provide in some fashion. But I think you're right. If there's a situation where there ought to be a situation where the veterinary could have an agreement, something on file with the person saying that if this animal is continuously knocking over the water, then maybe a different arrangement could be made. Just there's always a case where somebody has not properly watered animals, especially when it gets heated, and we're just trying to avoid that. But I'd be glad, we'd enjoy the opportunity to just kind of look at some of our citations and our history at some time. But yeah, ultimately, it could potentially be $1,000 for each violation, but rarely does that happen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Jacobs.
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. On page 10 of the bill, line 34, what is the purpose of that?
So biosecurity is important, particularly if there's incidences of disease. So companion animals can harbor diseases that are easily spread if there's not some type of biosecurity. It's kind of a scary looking term, but it's mostly just sanitation practices. Nobody comes in the facility without at least disinfecting their boots. They're careful not to have a lot of people coming in and causing disease. It's primarily on a disease control basis.
Okay, and if I may, on page 1, on the identifying animal breeders, that's just dogs and cats, right? It's not rodents or birds or...
It could be, yes.
Well, you have in the animal definition rabbits. You know how rabbits breed?
I kind of have an idea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, any other questions? I don't
You have a good story to tell tonight at your speech, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, okay. Okay, so now we're going to move on, and so thank you, Mr. Secretary. Yes, Kyle, if you've got some answers for what Representative Roth wanted the answer to.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to circle back to Representative Roth's question from my brief about the appeals process available to licensees and permittees. And you can see that in current law on page 6 of the bill, starting on line 6. It states for any refusal to issue or renew a license or permit and any suspension or revocation of a license or permit, that can only be done after notice and opportunity for a hearing provided under the provisions of the Kansas Administrative Procedure Act. And those kind of hearings are a lot less formal than like a court proceeding. But if after that hearing, you could appeal it to under the Kansas Judicial Review Act, that would go into court. And then you can also see on page 7, starting in line 34, similar provisions. Before a civil penalty can be imposed on someone, there would first have to be notice and an opportunity for a hearing under that Administrative Procedure Act. And then again, a little lower down, starting on line 40, that provision deals with seizing and impounding and includes similar provisions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Okay. Now, not only for time reasons, but want to give everybody adequate time to make their case, and we will go with the oral proponents, and then at that time we will ask if there are questions. So, members, if you through the testimony, if you have a question, let Vice Chair Mosier or I know. Vice Chair Mosier will be the timekeeper. We will do 5 minutes, and give or take, I don't want to go 10 minutes, but if you're in the middle of a thought at 5, we'll do our best not to cut you off. I want you to stay on topic as best you can, all the proponents and opponents now, and then we'll get out of here before 9 o'clock tonight. So with that, up next is Crystal Swan Black Deer, representing Shelters, the Kansas Pet Animal Health Advisory Board, Executive Director of Leavenworth County Humane Society. So, Ms. Black Deer, thanks for coming to committee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, and thanks for doing my introduction, because now I don't have to. No. Yeah, I serve as the Executive Director of the Leavenworth County Humane Society, which was first started in 1885. It was started in Leavenworth, but we're now in Lansing. I've been attending Pet Animal Advisory Board meetings for more than 10 years. As a member of the public, I witnessed an earlier review and revision meetings, and I'm aware of the amount of work that goes in to putting together a statute that both makes sense and brings things up to date. But our board, the Pet Animal Advisory Board, advises the department. We don't write legislation. We don't approve legislation. We don't disapprove. We don't decide what changes are made. We input. We review and make recommendations. I joined the Pet Animal Advisory Board in 2021, and shelters are the largest single category of licensees, 253 licenses. And of course, these numbers change on a daily basis. So as of the last Pet Animal Advisory Board meeting, it was 253 licensees. Rescues, 52 of those, don't have a seat on the board. So I'm also charged with being their voice at the Pet Animal Advisory Board. combined shelter and rescue licensees, there are 291 of us, outnumber the categories of breeders. There are 278 of them who hold 4 seats on the board. So even though the board has all licensees represented in some shape or fashion, it's very heavily weighted to those who profit from the industry, not those who serve their communities, largely on a nonprofit basis. I've been in attendance at 2 meetings of the board, the Pet Animal Advisory Board, since December of last year, where updates to the act were discussed and members of the board spoke freely. We first discussed a list of proposals, then we talked about 23 RS 0517, and then finally the bill that you're looking at today. Additionally, the director of the program sent out a copy of the bill requesting input from the board members on the 26th of January. I don't know what kind of response she got. I know I sent her some comments. The board members have had multiple opportunities to provide input to this bill. There have even been 2 special emergency meetings called by the chair to discuss these issues. I believe the program has gone above and beyond to keep the board informed and to solicit our input on House Bill 2437. The department and the program have every right and responsibility to propose legislation that empowers them to do their jobs properly, to ensure the health of Kansas pet dogs and cats, to equitably enforce standards, and to adjust to the evolving standards of practice in animal care. The updates in 2437 help the program and all of the licensees under the program to improve and hold high the standards of the Kansas pet animal industry. I'm sure we can all agree that's what we all want. I urge your support of House Bill 2437, and I will be available for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you again. And I do want to say a late happy birthday to Representative Carlin, who I believe had a birthday on the 17th. No? No, but I wish I had. I will check my sources.
Oh, okay. Up next, Linda Constable, former board member, so on and so forth. I'm sorry, there's a bunch of this. So anyway, you can tell us who you represent. I guess, is she here, Linda Constable?
I am here remotely.
Oh, you are on line. Okay. Go ahead.
All
Welcome
right.
to the committee.
Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for allowing me to talk remotely. I am a retired lawyer. I have been on the board of the Kansas Humane Society. I have been and currently am on the board of Spay Neuter Kansas. And for years ago, decades perhaps, I was on the Kansas Pet Animal Advisory Board. I am not representing any group. I am merely a member of the public. I've never bred a pet animal, and I've never sold a pet animal. I've had a lot of them. I have absolutely no conflict of interest with respect to this bill. And what I want to do, and you're getting a lot of really good information about the pluses of the bill, but I want to share my perspective as a consumer and a member of the public. And first of all, I think probably everyone has to know that Kansas has a bad reputation as a puppy mill state. You can't Google anything about puppy mills and states and not find Kansas in the top list. The list of the top maybe 3, 4, 5. And I think I am fairly representative of pet owners. My dogs are family, and I don't just care about my dogs, I care about other dogs and puppies. I would absolutely never purchase an animal that I know is from a known bad breeder puppy mill. Partly because that would support what I see as animal neglect and abuse and suffering, and also because I think it means that I might get a dog with significant medical issues, and I would keep that dog. I'd spend whatever I had to spend. And also, I don't shop at any store that I think sells puppy mill puppies. And I go to an extreme. If I am shopping next door to that kind of a store and I need a $3 item, I get in the car and go across town. And I should tell you, I also have an MBA. I absolutely understand profit margins and inventory and overhead. So I understand some of the economic issues involved. But I see puppies as very different from other, in quotes, products. For example, if I go out to buy a dishwasher, I go to Consumer Reports and I get a lot of help knowing what I'm buying. If I'm looking to buy a purebred puppy, or a puppy, I guess, anywhere, I don't have a similar resource that I can go to and make some better decisions. And the puppy is a lot bigger, has a lot bigger impact on my life because it is a member of the family and I'm going to have that puppy for a decade and probably quite a lot more. Anyway, my point is I support the act. It is more protective of the animals. And I also think that the good breeders in Kansas should support the act. To the extent we have good breeders, they are at a competitive disadvantage with bad breeders because almost by definition, the good breeders are spending more money. And I think in the long run, to the extent we can have good breeders, higher standards, it should help the industry. And if I were a breeder, I would be looking at something like a marketing program called Kansas Means Confidence when you look for a puppy. I think long term, if we can fix our bad reputation as a puppy mill state, I think we help the industry. And certainly we do what I want to do, which is protect the animals. Anyway, that is my quick summary of where I'm coming from. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Constable. Up next, Jasmine Kyle, Director of the Southeast Kansas Humane Society. Welcome to committee.
Thank you so much. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Jasmine Kyle, and I am the director of the Southeast Kansas Humane Society. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of our organization and a coalition of animal welfare supporters in Southeast Kansas who stand in support of House Bill 2437. There are many positive changes to the Kansas Pet Animal Act within this bill, and several of them are crucial to supporting the work of nonprofit animal shelters in your districts. This tightens gaps in the current act. All licensees would now be required to comply with the Kansas Pet Animal Act, whether they sell in-state or out-of-state. This would further protect animal health and disease traceability. That's the big one. The provisions in this bill follow the standards set by the American Veterinary Medical Association, like providing continuous access to water for dogs and cats, regular exercise and socialization. Licensees are also required to follow disease prevention standards as set by AFI. House Bill 2437 provides a direct right of recovery to Kansas animal shelters for the costs of care provided to animals housed by them on behalf of the state. This is absolutely necessary for shelters to continue to assist the state. The Southeast Kansas Humane Society has assisted KDA and AFI program with large-scale seizures. This is a huge undertaking and, of course, financial risk for a nonprofit shelter to take on the cost of care when reimbursement is uncertain. These costs include, but of course are not limited to, veterinary medical care, food, and housing. Shelters may be required to house and care for seized animals for several days or, of course, most likely several weeks. Our shelters have to find the space and staffing to provide these essential services for the state. In closing, we ask that you support the work of Kansas shelters and rescues by passing House Bill 2437. And of course, I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee has. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Up next, Ashley Beeson, Kansas Pet Protection Coalition. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Committee. Thanks for the opportunity to provide testimony today. I'm Ashley Beeson, representing the Kansas Pet Protection Coalition and our coalition partners, some of whom you've heard from already today, and others that are listed on the last page of my testimony. These include animal shelters and rescues, animal control departments, and commercial pet entities working to advance the health and wellness of pet animals in Kansas. As you've heard, Kansas consistently ranks as a top puppy mill state, diminishing our state's reputation as a leader in pet animal health. Advancing this bill, we believe, is necessary to credibly position Kansas as a leader in this area. And as a coalition, we want to see Kansas become a destination state when it comes to a reputable pet industry. And we've heard how profitable that industry is. In 2018, the legislative post-audit revealed a variety of deficiencies in the Animal Facilities Inspection Program. This bill responds to that audit when it comes to enforcement. Today, the AFI program has asked for your support. They address many of those deficiencies in this updated statute in order to improve their program. So we hope that you'll stand behind that request. Kansas Pet Protection Coalition strongly supports House Bill 2437. We believe it to be very common sense updates to an act that hasn't been updated in decades. For that reason, I do want to dispel some misinformation that we believe you will probably hear from opponents. Some of the opposition to this bill will likely come from specific members of the Kansas Pet Animal Advisory Board. Notably, though, the shelter, veterinarian, and public representative members support this bill. To understand the dynamics of the board, and Crystal Swan Blackdeer did get into some of this, but there is a gross imbalance on that board, and it has driven sort of the inertia of what that board has accomplished. So we've been following that board for more than a decade, and for all of those years, primarily the seats have gone to breeders, as Crystal mentioned, 4 seats for the categories of breeders, 1 for both animal shelters and rescues. Because it's not a representative board of licensees in the state, breeders have a louder voice and benefit from lower animal care standards and a historical lack of enforcement. They have consistently argued against improvements to the Kansas Pet Animal Act over the years. As Crystal mentioned, they did have the opportunity in December when the Animal Advisory Board met to contribute to the provisions of this bill, and we were present for 3 subsequent meetings when they could have pointed out specific substantive concerns about provisions of the bill, but they did not. We were there when they offered no substantive feedback other than suggesting that the act not be opened at all. So please consider their conflict of interest as they work against reasonable common sense updates to this act. We do anticipate that this same group, joined by others motivated by self-interest, may complain about what's called a no-contact fee. This was adopted by the legislature 5 or 6 years ago. And to explain, a no-contact inspection is when an inspector comes out to a licensed facility for an inspection. These are not previously scheduled, just like many regulatory agencies do not previously schedule them. But when they get there, the licensee is unavailable for the inspection, and they either haven't designated a representative or the designated representative is not available. So previously, this was a significant problem for AFI prior to fees being issued. The legislature actually crafted this solution by adding the fees, and it has been enormously successful, reducing no contacts by more than 50%. And saving the state close to $50,000 annually in staff and travel costs as inspectors make their way around. Blanket criticism of a demonstrably successful solution, we think, speaks volumes regarding their motivations. We ask you to consider why certain groups may oppose a common sense bill designed to correct deficiencies in a program whose purpose is to protect the health and safety of pet animals. Consider why certain individuals might be opposed to that if there's something to hide, and why they might not be interested in being held to reasonable standards, those of which shelters are also held to and support. We support House Bill 2437, and we ask you to do the same. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for being here. Questions committee for this group? Oh, I'm sorry, we do. Well, right.
I had registered to testify and I haven't been called.
Who are you?
Vanessa Cowie.
Okay. Come forward. And your name, you tell us your name.
Thank you. My name is Vanessa Cowie. I'm the Executive Director of Prairie Paws Animal Shelter, and I also serve as the Chair of the Midwest Alliance for Animals. I'm testifying today in support of this bill. I have worked in companion animal welfare for almost a decade. I have run 2 no-kill shelters in the state of Kansas. I have a degree in ag science and business, and I see the pet animal industry differently than my fellow proponents, so I'd like to walk you through the way that I see it. Breeders are for-profit businesses. I think of them as manufacturers. They create a product, they sell it directly to consumers, they distribute it, they sell it online. Their cost to production, the product has value, is sold for a price that is largely determined by the free market. They are regulated. Meeting the demands of the regulation adds costs, probably drives up the price of the product. They can react, as all businesses do, to consumer demand. They can value add. They can strategically market their end product. They have mechanisms to offload devalued product, which is usually puppies that have aged out of high demand or breeding stock that's no longer valuable. Consumers are fueling the pet animal industry, and while the product has demand, there will always be a market for it. So a for-profit business to not achieve compliance on a state inspection, what went wrong? Economics would say that if the expectations are equal across producers, the cost of compliance is a cost of production. It would either be built into the price of the end product or it would be deducted from the profit. But the market would correct for this over time. And if that means the price of puppies and kittens goes up, then that's capitalism, and it works in many industries. Then you have the nonprofit shelters. We don't manufacture, we don't create products. We acquire devalued, abandoned product that the market doesn't want. If there were a strong consumer demand for our product, it wouldn't end up with us. Forget for a moment that the product is pet animals and compare it to any other industry that recognizes a product has devalued to a point that it needs to be offloaded is a point of zero return. What happens to the product? Food animals are processed, which some representatives have pointed out today, or sold to other breeders, other food animal industry. Inanimate product might go to landfill, might be recycled into other products. But remember, they are pet animals. My values align with all Kansans who demand that a high percentage of live outcomes for pet animals is expected. So the shelters end up with a product that has no value, that we can't offload, and then we have to spend an additional $200 to $500 an animal in cost of production. We spay, neuter them, we vaccinate them, we microchip them, we do all of the veterinary, the housing. Costs us about $400 to put an animal up for adoption. Compared to the value of the product, what will the consumer pay for it? $50 to $100. Unsustainable, economically unsustainable market that we have to live in and operate in. So in come the taxpayers and the donors. They subsidize the loss because the citizens who are furthering our missions demand that we sell a negative ROI product. Thousands of tiny bailouts to keep us going. If a shelter is unable to achieve compliance on a state inspection, it's for the same reasons as a breeder. They didn't invest in compliance. But you must have sympathy that the shelters are operating without the benefits of a traditional economic system and are therefore needing to fundraise most of the money that's required to do so. So then you bring in the AFI, the regulating operation. They regulate both entities, mostly using the Pet Animal Act. The Act has some quirks. But the provisions being provided to the species at each of these licensees is different. The expectation is different. Animals that live in animal shelters spend about 20 to 30 days there, while breeding stock and breeders spend their entire lives. You could argue that a longer length of stay requires stronger animal welfare considerations at breeding facilities. Most animal shelters are compliant with the Act, not because they study it closely, but because they are open to the public. With donors, who are our investors, walking through every day, the court of public opinion can sometimes shut you down faster than the Department of Ag can. But there are bad apples on both sides, and the AFI is doing an exceptional job in revoking those licenses. When the AFI revokes a license from a breeder who had all of the benefits of selling a high-value product in a free market, they call on the shelter to take on the product. We typically end up with devalued product, mostly breeding stock. They're poorly socialized. Unsocialized dogs cost us thousands of dollars more than a regular dog. I also have contracts with municipalities in my area that require me to take in animals from my local population. If I help the state too much, I can't serve my local municipalities. I lose my funding agreements. The right of recovery language in this bill would support us in supporting the state. So I'm here to explain that there is no comparable system. Representative Gardner tried to compare us to large food animal industry, and it's not quite closely aligned. My economics lecture is intended to highlight that any claim of hardship that a for-profit business would relate to increased expectations will be corrected by the free market. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's all I have for in person. Are there anybody else in person who wants to testify as a proponent? And members, do you have questions for this first group you've heard from? Seeing none, we'll move on. Online, do we still have some online? Up next, I have Ellen Kerner from Spay Neuter, Kansas. Ellen, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead. Your 5 minutes starts now.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. And members of the
Wait a minute. Whoa. Stop. Wait a minute. We've got a bad feedback. In the old days, we'd say turn the radio down, but yeah. You may have your microphone close to your speaker that you're hearing. Should we have her see if she can say her name or something? Or is that it?
No,
There.
Let me try
Okay.
to mute myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're ready to go. I'm sorry, we had an internal mic that was left on. Thank you. So, Ms. Kerner, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for letting me speak virtually. I've never done this before, so that's kind of a little bit interesting. My name is Ellen Corner, and I have been in animal welfare for over 50 years. I am a proponent of this bill, and I have a little bit of a history with this bill because I was one of the many people who argued for this bill to turn it into law in 1988. Okay, and I was also appointed to serve on the very first advisory board for the Pet Animal Act, and did so as I was the president of the Kansas Humane Society at that time. It was while I was at the with the Kansas Humane Society that I realized the conditions of our commercial kennels were in at that time. And because I oversaw the complaints of neglect and cruelty that came into the Kansas Humane Society. At that time, there were no regulations by the state over this industry. And it was very apparent when I went to many different commercial kennels that the USDA inspections were not at all adequate for these things. And that is what drove us to then say we need to have state regulations for this industry because the USDA regulations did not support or at least provide that it was a good industry. And that would be the reason why we sort of they may have taken out some of the USDA minimum standards and replaced them with the state standards. Since 1989, the Pet Animal Act has seen many changes to lessen the statute and the regulations. This bill, I think, is a reset of that in order to improve the statute and raise the bar for many of the minimum standards that have now been put back in of USDA. Because of that, I'm going to make it very short. Because of that, I would hope that you would see that it is important for the state to regulate these industries on an equal basis and pass this ordinance because this has a lot of good things that will help both the industry and the rescues and the shelters and the state of Kansas. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can. Thank you. Sorry about that. And have my mic on.
Okay, because I can't hardly hear you guys.
Okay. Up next, Susan Hakes Kaufman, Chair of Friends of the KCK Animal Services. Susan, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I'm here to talk to you as a resident today of the state of Kansas, but I also want to give you a little bit of background from where I'm coming from. But first of all, I wanted to thank you for your time and for allowing me to speak in favor of HB 2437, which includes several positive changes to the Kansas Pet Animal Act. After 33 years, the Act desperately required long-awaited improvements. As a Kansas resident and a pet advocate, I'm supportive of the proposed updates. I wanted to take a moment to provide some background on my perspective and experience. I've served on the board of 2 animal shelters in Kansas. I've co-founded 2 organizations to support spay and neuter and vaccination for pet owners who can't afford these services. I managed a cat rescue program as part of a well-run shelter in Shawnee, Kansas for 3 years, and I'm in the process of co-founding a new cat rescue to rescue and adopt homeless cats in Johnson and Wyandotte counties. And I've fostered numerous dogs and cats. I also currently serve as the board chair for Friends of KCK Animal Services, which is the municipal shelter in Kansas City, Kansas. And I also serve on HSUS as a Kansas volunteer. So you could say that I'm just a little excited about the positive impact these improvements in this bill would have on Kansas pets and their people. The management and oversight changes will bring more transparency to the AFI program and will track deficiencies across a longer timeline. The improvements also close loopholes, so distributors selling animals into the state will now be required to have a license to ensure disease traceability. And all licensees will have to comply with the Kansas Pet Animal Act, whether they sell in-state or out of state. In my view, this sounds like a great idea for our state, considering our dependency on agriculture for our economy. There are also numerous common sense improvements to hopefully help prevent inhumane treatment of dogs and cats, such as setting the standard for dogs and cats to have continuous access to water as recommended by the AVMA, among other improvements. As the founder and supporter of animal shelters and rescue networks, I'm particularly heartened by some of the relief items for licensees, which are practical and make a great deal of common sense. In conclusion, I urge the committee to keep the proposed changes to the Kansas Pet Animal Act intact and pass HB 2437 out of committee for a vote. Again, I appreciate your time and I thank you for listening.
Thank you. That's everyone online, correct? Okay. We also have written proponents from Nick Orbaugh, Amber Balby, Kelly Bogner, Shanti Mikulich, I don't know. You all know her. She's from Sedgwick County. Look it up. Tam Singer, CEO of Great Plains, as well as Mitch Gringstead, State Director of Humane Society of the U.S. She is in the audience. Okay. Is that it for proponents? Seeing that, we will now go to opponents. And again, with the time where we are, I will give time as needed for fellow representative, and then we will go back to the 5 minutes. And I guess I see no questions, members, but I think everybody will be available at the end if we want to go back and circle back. So with that, we will welcome Representative Lewis Bloom for the Kansas House of Representatives. Representative, thanks for joining us. I don't know. Is his material?
No, they have it electronically. Okay.
Right. What's that? Your testimony has been given to the committee members. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee member, for letting me speak. This is the first time that I've been a kennel owner, which I've now retired, and my wife, and I've been allowed to speak. I worked 2 hard years to get here. And this was part of the reason I'm here. As a 35-year-old kennel owner, I think I qualify to talk and would like to give you my opinion and what has happened to me. A few years ago, I watched 2 animal rights activists be appointed to our small animal advisory board when we had been told the previous day it would never happen in Kansas, and especially not in the Kansas Department of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture and Laura Crowley have refused for over a year to fill the breeder position and have replaced the veterinarian on the board with a simple email, "You're through." I called Dr. Laura Moreland a couple days ago, and she said the only reason they replaced me was they wanted someone more sympathetic to the Humane Society of the United States, and they were seated immediately. Dr. Moreland said it was the only board she'd ever served on where you never got a simple thanks. They are trying to stack the board. It's what they're trying to do. We have had a breeder for the breeder position for over a year, and they won't put her on the board. Very, very well qualified. The bill from the Department of Agriculture and the Humane Society of the United States is nothing more than a gotcha bill designed to get the Kansas dog breeders out of business and let the Humane Society of the United States, animal shelters, rescue groups run the show. Do you know foster people aren't even inspected? The next time you hear nonprofit, adoption fee, rehoming charge, wake up. It may not be going to the place you think it is. Ask these people for a paper trail. Ask them how they got their puppies. See how far you get. Our kennel breeders have a paper trail that goes back at least 6 dog generations. These pups are from DNA checked parents. They are socialized, wormed, vaccinated, veterinarian checked at least 3 times before you get them. They are chipped and kept in spotless climate-controlled kennels. For Pete's sakes, don't pay much attention to the inspector reports. Their job is to get us out of business. It never used to be that way. When we started, they got out of their car and they said, "How can we help you?" 35 years ago. Now it's let's just see how we can get you out of business. Their job is to put us out of business. It's the same old thing. Follow the dollar. The Humane Society of the United States, shelters, rescues, adoptions, they are all nonprofit, keep donating, and all the time they're calling us puppy mills. I would like to know how we could be called puppy mills when we are inspected nonstop, 365 days a year. Anytime, they come anytime. And as far as that no contact fee, we have to be within 30 minutes of our house, 24/7, 365. How would you like that? And if they say you can get somebody to cover for you, you try that where we live. My wife and I, now listen, my wife and I cannot legally go to church together in the state of Kansas. That's how we are being treated. Kennels are the only thing they can't make money on. Our purebred kennels are the only thing these organizations cannot make money on. And they're doing the best to get rid of one of our state's best professions. Throw this trash bill out. Just follow the dollar. I want you to understand, HSUS is not the same as our local Humane Society. Our local Humane Societies are good. I get a little emotional about this because we have a wonderful profession and they're trying to ruin us. And if you could show me a puppy mill in Kansas now that is being inspected any time of the day or night by the state and by the federal government, I would like to see it. They have used this puppy mill crap for 20 years ago. Yes, our state was a mess. It has not been that way for years. It is nothing but a word to get everybody's emotions riled up and say Kansas is a puppy mill state. Kansas is no longer a puppy mill state, and it hasn't been for years, and it's impossible for it to be a puppy mill state. I will stay here as long as you want. I will ask any questions you want to ask me. I'm here for your questions, and believe me, I have been through it.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions? Representative Bloom? Go be around in case somebody has later based on other testimony. Thank you. Up next, Laura Lee Thomas, Pet Animal Advisory Board member, Secretary of Kansas Pet Professionals. Welcome to committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I've enjoyed sitting here listening to all the different things, but the perspective that I wanted to bring forth for you today was you all had the opportunity to ask questions about this bill and to see what was actually going on. In the Kansas Pet Animal Act, I have been a breeder for 24 years. And in the Kansas Pet Animal Act, which is what I follow every day in order to make sure that my animals are healthy and that I'm in compliance, it says in section 47-1725 that the Kansas Pet Animal Act, you'll find the duties and powers of the Pet Animal Advisory Board. It clearly states that it's the board's responsibility to review the status of the Kansas Pet Animal Act and to make recommendations concerning the rules. We have several members sitting in here that are on the Pet Animal Advisory Board, and the day that the bill was introduced, yes, we were informed that there was going to be a bill. No one in the Department of Agriculture would let us know what was in the bill. But the day that we had our meeting, it was submitted to the legislature. And so what's so frustrating about it is in order to run my business every day, I have to follow the Pet Animal Act. And yet the Department of Agriculture doesn't even have to follow the rule that says here that our advisory board is supposed to know about the bill ahead of time and talk, just like you were sitting amongst here, and talk about what's good for each licensees. The advisory board was put together by the peers back then so that there was representation of every license in the state. And so because of all of those licenses, you heard from Crystal Black Deer that the rescues and shelters have the most right now. But I want to tell you that 10 years ago, I represented the animal breeders on here and we had the most on there. And so if you want to, ask some questions, wonder why are the breeders leaving? It's because we're getting kicked out, we're getting shoved out, we're getting regulated out. And it's not that I don't think that these new things in the Pet Animal Act are necessary. The part that I'm most disappointed about, I guess, is because I take my appointment on the Pet Animal Advisory Board very I think that it's an honor to be on there. And so I feel that I'm representing the people of the licensees, and when the department just goes rogue and decides they're going to add a bill, then tell us later what's going to happen in it. Yeah, it's too late to talk about it after it's already been submitted, and all of the views of the licensees haven't even been made known so that we could talk about it, because what might be good for one licensee might not work for another one, such as that water thing. There's reasons that we don't put water in front of the puppies when the people are coming to look at them, because I've spent all that time washing them and drying them. And if I put a bowl of water, just like he said, they're going to get all wet. So it's things like that that we should talk about as an advisory board. So I just ask that you would please not even work this bill until the advisory board actually gets a chance to talk about it together as a group. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Up next, Michelle Russell, President of the Kansas Pet Professionals. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Representative Rogers, and thank you, Board, for allowing me to come here this afternoon. Probably is evening now, for coming and be able to speak what I have on my heart today. I'm going to provide the testimony regarding House Bill 2437. I'm a professional breeder in good standing with the Kansas Department of Ag and also with the USDA, where I am licensed and I am regulated and I am inspected multiple times a year by both entities. USDA is usually by my place a couple times a year, the state usually once a year, and then I also have a veterinarian that comes around once or twice a year. And that's not counting my weekly appointments that I have where we take in our dogs for him to examine or whatever we need to have done. So I also serve on other animal regulated boards within our industry. I have the privilege of being one of the breeders who participated in the writing of the standards for Purdue University Canine Care Certified Program. Some of you folks sitting here may be aware of that program. But I was one of the initial people that was working on that. I also serve on the Breeder Leadership Council, which is a national organization And I also am part of the Canine Care Board of Pet Advocacy, and they were formerly known as PJAC. Some of you might be aware of that legislative group of individuals. Today, I'm voicing my concerns with opening the Kansas Pet Animal Act for House Bill 2437. I do not believe the requested changes by the Department of Ag are warranted. Last year, the department presented a bill to move the program out of the Division of Animal Health, and thankfully, that died in committee. The program then went on to receive a state general fund enhancement that provided the program staff, increased salaries, and the ability to add positions into the program. A bill presented this year was not warranted or expected. With the added funding, the department should consider growth of the program and not open the bill for minute changes and additions. We should only open the act to beneficial language. I believe this bill does not provide that. Kansas is one of the most highly regulated states across the country. The Kansas Department of Agriculture is constantly trying to change or add increased regulations, license fees, no contact fees for our licensees throughout the state. The statutes, and they're trying to change it through statutes, rules, and regulation, but continue to look the other way for the unlicensed and the pets that cross Kansas borders illegally. This results in some businesses feeling though they are operating in a hostile environment, which our members feel is already overregulated. On behalf of the Kansas pet professionals, I would ask that if there could be a more efficient way of holding the department accountable through more transparency to the concerns of the department and the licensees. While we oppose this bill as written, we ask that you take our requested amendments into consideration should this bill move forward. Until these amendments are discussed and considered, Kansas pet professionals will not be in support of this bill. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you would have, because I am a breeder, and these laws do affect me.
Thank you. Up next, Tyler Cower, Kansas Pet Professionals. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Tyler Cower, and I am a private consultant to the Kansas Pet Professionals, which is an organization that is made up of licensed breeders throughout the state of Kansas. I worked for the Animal Facilities Inspection Program immediately out of college and was promoted through the various positions of the program. I resigned from the program in 2021 as a program manager. In 2018, the program received an audit that was less than satisfactory and provided 5 recommendations to the program. When I was promoted to the program manager, I was tasked to answer those recommendations. I worked with the department attorney, and we addressed all the audit recommendations, and a post-audit report shows this. I share this with you to provide you some context of why I'm here today and to give the industry a voice. This is the second consecutive year the department has submitted legislation without presenting it to the Kansas Pet Advisory Board. The department hasn't followed the Pet Animal Act regarding the board, and they also haven't followed the act regarding who is tasked per statute to enforce this act. Animal Health Commissioner Dr. Justin Smith has been pushed aside and kept at arm's length to this program in which he is lawfully bound to oversee per the Kansas Pet Animal Act. He had no involvement in writing of this bill, and might I point out, he is not present here today. Last year, you may recall Senate Bill 551 that would have moved the program out from animal health, establishing a division within the department under the administration of the Pet Animal Facilities Director. While it died in committee, it seems the department operates as if it went through. The department continues to develop unnecessary and unwarranted bills that cause our industry to halt their businesses and address you here today. They haven't considered all industry entities when creating these bills, but the department has engaged in numerous meetings with animal rights organizations. And if this doesn't concern you for the pet industry, I implore you to consider what that impact collaborating with these organizations could be to the Kansas agricultural industry as a whole. House Bill 2437 is a very minute amount of what needs to be addressed for our industry. The industry does not wish to have unlawful facilities continuing operation, such as the Johnson County shelter that is currently in the news due to violations over a period of years. When opening the act, necessary items for all entities should be addressed that are not within this bill. You'll notice I have provided written testimony that includes the pet the Kansas Pet Professionals requested amendments. I've gone into further detail in my written testimony, but I'll share you with highlights. I'll begin with summarizing the amendments we request within House Bill 2437. We do request a revision of the updated definition of adequate watering, omitting all closing inspection language as this can be established within regulation, and adjusting language for penalties against unlicensed facilities. With those minor amendment requests to the proposed bill, we request the following amendments to address concerns that the industry has that this bill does not. That would be establishing a final date to renew so that further penalties could be pursued rather than just a $70 late fee. Adjust language to address inspection timeframes following a minimum standard to avoid potential no contacts. Revising notice of inspection language for initial and routine inspections. Adjusting license fees to be the same for all entities the Pet Animal Act licenses, along with creating a license category of caregivers, which would reinstate foster care licenses and include language for guardian homes that breeders have been utilizing that are currently unregulated. In consideration of the lawsuit currently being litigated regarding if no contact fees are constitutional or not, we are proposing a revision to that no contact fee language. Revision of seizure language that provides the program with law enforcement support, and revising board member appointment procedures, along with requiring that drafted language be presented to the board prior to submission from the department. We wish to see that the program grow, and one way to do that would be to add pet animal groomers to the act. Groomers are not regulated within the state, and the program does receive multiple complaints regarding groomers. The Kansas Pet Professionals are asking you to allow licensees to care for their animals without the constant worry of the program setting them up for failure and scrambling to meet unnecessary laws. Kansas Pet Professionals oppose House Bill 2437 as written, and should this committee choose to move forward with this bill, we ask that you consider the requested amendments I have provided you in my written testimony. Thank you for allowing me to speak today, and I am happy to stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and the amendment request is in her testimony, committee. Before we go to the last one that I have down, I'll make sure there's no surprises. Somebody else is anybody else here to testify in opposition that I'm not aware of? Okay. We will move forward. Up next, Aaron Popalka, Legal and Government Affairs Vice President of Kansas Livestock Association. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleasure to be here again in front of the committee. I'm Aaron Popelk with the Kansas Livestock Association. I want to say we're appearing here today as opponents, but with some amendments we could get the neutral. We realize that this is a pet animal bill, but we want to highlight 3 items that could have implications for the livestock industry and we believe don't belong in this bill. We do think there are things potentially in this bill that will help Secretary Beam and his team do their job, and we're not here to stand in the way of that. But there are, again, 3 things I'm going to highlight that need to come out of this bill, because we think that those have been influenced by groups like HSUS, that's an extremist group that wants to put not just pet breeders, but livestock operators out of business. First of those is this. Last year, I think it was mentioned that there was a bill in the Senate to divide the pet and livestock health programs. We opposed that bill, and it didn't go anywhere. There's a reason why that's not a good idea. We need one person who's in charge of animal health in case we have zoonotic disease outbreaks and is overseeing the entire program. And I think Ms. Cower's testimony is pretty powerful on this point. That the animal health commissioner is already being marginalized in some aspects. This bill, we think, attempts to get at that. And I have it on page 13, line 25 and 26, where it requires the commissioner in consultation with the Animal Facilities Inspection Program Director. That piece is, again, trying to whittle away at the commissioner's authority, and we think it doesn't belong in this bill. The commissioner already has the ability to consult with other pet animal staff. He doesn't need to be directed. Again, it's an attempt to chip away at that authority that we think is inappropriate. Second item are 2 terms used on page 11, line 26, and page 12, line 6. And that is, and Vice Chair Mosier mentioned, exercise and socialization. The reason we have this act is to provide minimum standards to prevent abuse and neglect. Exercise and socialization, as explained by the department, has nothing to do with that. It's really about how good is that pet coming out of that breeder's program? That is something the industry, and I think the economists spoke to this, will self-regulate. If they're not getting the public good pets, it will take care of itself. It doesn't need government in the way. The reason why we're interested in this, these sorts of terms about exercise and socialization are directly related to things like Proposition 12 in California. If you don't know what that did, it was a proposition in California that banned gestation rates, banned laying hens, and basically pushed out veal production. And it's created havoc in a marketplace for our producers in Kansas, not just banning it in California, but our producers in Kansas getting their product in. You put this in the statute, is camel's nose under the tent. It is not necessary for the pet program and will eventually bleed over to livestock programs. Again, also the morbidity and mortality data, that is just, it's not necessary. It's just a way that numbers can be used to be put out there by the extremist groups and put these folks out of business. The same thing could happen to livestock. It's not necessary to run the program. The final thing I'll mention, and this is probably the most egregious part of the bill and really scares me when you think about its reach. And that begins on page 6, line 36 through 43, and continues on the top of page 7. It's this. It authorizes the commissioner to enter into contracts with the networks and the shelters, not just to care for the animals. I get that, right? The department shouldn't be in the business of taking care of these animals, but it also empowers the commissioner to enter contracts to have these groups actually do the seizing. That is wrong. This is private property you're talking about taking. It should only be done in the gravest circumstances. It should be done by a government official who has accountability to you all, not some private group. But to make it worse, on page 7 in the bill, it allows these groups to take a security interest. That means that they then, if you read on, can make a demand for payment of their costs. And if you don't pay it within 10 days, and they can make this request at any time. By the way, this isn't even in the UCC when it comes to security liens. This is extreme language. So they can make a request, and if you don't pay it in 10 days, it's deemed abandoned. First off, I don't think that's even constitutional. The due process clause of the Constitution requires due process. If you don't allow that to happen before the underlying adjudication, it's an issue. So, Mr. Chairman, I hear my time's up. Thank you for the time, and we'd request these amendments. If that happens, we'd go neutral. Happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Okay. That's all we have for oral here in person. Members, any questions for the group you heard? Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were a couple of statements that I guess I want to get clarification on. There was kind of an indication that this bill was a surprise and there was no discussion of it, but I'm looking at the December 7th minutes for the advisory committee meeting, and all of these things were mentioned, and they had a meeting. Can someone tell me if I'm misreading this document, or are we hearing inaccurate information in our testimony?
Is there someone from the... Please come forward to the microphone, identify who you are.
Well, I think we did receive this bill on December meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Greg Smith. I'm the chair of the Kansas Pet Animal Advisory Board. And we did receive this bill, but it was altered and we received it again. I think it was in January. I'm not sure what the date was. And then we had a special meeting whether we wanted to support that as a board or not at that time. So we had very, very limited time to discuss this.
But there was a discussion, right?
There was.
Not in depth, no.
What's that?
Not in depth.
Board discussion, I'll read from the minutes. Board discussion and feedback focused on the above regulations and the KDA proposed changes to each regulation.
That's regulations, not statutes. That's a different topic.
In the minutes, I'm not going to push this, but we stood up here and said the KDA just threw this and didn't tell anybody about it, and that's not true. Kate, there was a meeting with the advisory committee where every one of these proposed changes was mentioned. It's outlined and it mentions the specific statute.
Just a moment.
Sure. But so I'm confused on the timing. I have to go back to my notes. So you're saying in December we had this bill?
December 7th at 1 p.m.
Okay. And we discussed it. And then I believe we got it again in a revised form in January.
If you want Ms. Thomas to come.
Yeah.
And
So, yes, they presented a bill to us because we didn't know what they were going to do, and they gave us listings of the things that they wanted to put in there. They didn't say exactly what they wanted. We discussed it minimally. It wasn't like in depth of saying, okay, how is this going to affect this person? How is this going to affect this person? And then when they decided that it was going to be a bill, they submitted it, but it was sent to the legislature on the same day that we had this meeting on February 22nd. Oh, it's just maybe a few days that we had a chance to actually look at what the bill was. So yes, there was what they thought they were going to put in, but they would never tell us exactly what they wanted in the bill. That was never brought up to us until we saw it when they submitted it.
Representative?
I'll leave it at that. I would encourage the committee, if they want, you can look at the minutes from that meeting and see that they talked about every one of these changes.
Other questions? Seeing none. We also have opponent written in opposition, written by the Pet Animal Health Advisory Board, John Bales, member of Kansas Pet Professionals, Vicky Dorea, owner of Dorea's Dazzles and Doggies, Jenia Fortner, Janet Donnelly, member of the Kansas Pet Professionals, looks like there, Felicia Stahlbaumer, member of Kansas Pet Professionals, Shirley and Darrell Walton, animal breeder, and also member of the Kansas Pet Professionals, and Amber Bowlesby, Kansas Animal Control Association. Anyone else in opposition? Seeing none. Neutral. We have anyone here to testify in person for neutral? Seeing none, we have written testimony from Megan Kilgore from the Kansas Veterinary Medical Association. Seeing none, no one else, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2437. Don't all run off. At this time, I declare emergency final action and for Senate Bill 120. Committee, what is your pleasure? Representative Mosier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move we pass Senate Bill 120 out of committee.
Been moved, seconded by Representative White. Discussion? I guess we can't strike. I'm sorry, it's a late day. No discussion. All those, what? Yeah, oh, right. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Post same sign. No. Bill is passed. Senate Bill 120 is passed out favorably. Next committee meeting will be the second Wednesday of 2024. We are adjourned.